Hello, my friends. Glad to be here with you. This is No Soundbites Allowed. I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. And this is going to be just a short little video, even though we normally do long-form political commentary. And I just want to take a moment because there was a really interesting question that I ran into today, and I want to address this very quickly. Now, you may have noticed this, and I was speaking about it. This is on Parler. I also put it out on Twitter and on Facebook. And very simply, the question I had asked today is, if Democrats truly support minorities, why is Bloomberg spending $20 million on felons and $100 million on the Biden-Harris election instead of $55 million to rebuild Minneapolis and the black businesses and homes that were destroyed during the BLM riots? It's a pretty straightforward question, you would think, except it's not. Now, let's walk through this because it's a serious question and it should be asked seriously. And yet no one else in the media, as far as I can tell, has ever asked this question of Lebron James, of Mike Bloomberg, of Joe Biden, of Kamala Harris, and it really should be asked. So let's get into this a little bit. So the question we're going to start off with, back in January 31st of this year, 2020, according to Politico, and you'll see the links to all the articles that I'm speaking about in the description here on YouTube. But on the 31st of January, while there were still many candidates out there, we know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were in favor of, if not ending, reducing cash bail reform. We know that in the Biden campaign alone, according to Reuters, on May 30th, after we started seeing some of the riots starting for the George Floyd protests, we saw that the Biden staff had committed to paying for the bail for these protesters, these violent protests. Okay, we know that at least 13 Biden campaign staff members were out there posting their support for the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which was there to help provide for bail for individuals who were arrested for the rioting. Now, we've seen cashless bail as an idea in other places, like in New York City. In New York City, we see that in New York State, because New York State, under the single party rule of Democrats, decided to enact cashless bail. And we know that between that and the COVID crisis, 2,500 individuals were released from Rikers Island. And of those 250 individuals, 2,500 individuals, 250 reoffended, with arrests of 450 times. So each person they released, each of these 250, 10%, went out and committed 2 more crimes. And they've been released again. And this is true as of June 12th, 2020. Now, Democrats have also gone even further. Democrats, when we first heard about the death of Justice Ginsburg, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she died on Friday, within 1 hour, from 9 p.m., the hour of 9 p.m. on Friday, instantly, we saw Democrats come together and they put together $6.2 million were raised by the time 10 o'clock came. That's $100,000 per minute was raised so that Democrats would be able to have senators win in races across the country so that they would be able to take over the Supreme Court, so that they could pack the court, as we have been told since that time. And as a defiance of the constitutional right of President Trump or any president to replace a Supreme Court justice nominee. We know that as of Monday, according to the New York Times, according to the New York Times, Justice Ginsburg's death has reshaped the 2020 elections, especially for the Senate. And we see that they were able on Monday, that would be the 22nd of September, Democrats had contributed more than $160 million online through Act Blue. That's the same source that people, when you're donating to Black Lives Matters, that money goes to Act Blue, which then goes to various Democratic candidates. We know that at least 13 Democratic candidates or senators raised $1.3 million each for the single fundraising effort of getting Democrats elected to the Senate. Now, how does that all play together with what I'm talking about? Because remember, Democrats themselves, their party, the Democratic Party, states that they are the party of women, of blacks, of Hispanics, of minorities, whatever you want to call a minority. That's their thing. They are the identity, gender, politics party. That is their platform. And they are there saying that they are going to support and help people. They have been strong advocates throughout the summer of BLM riots and protests across the nation. And I say that because we see that in Portland. We've seen that in Seattle. We've seen that in Kenosha. We've seen that in Austin, in Indianapolis. We've seen it in cities in New York City. We've seen that they have come up and said either directly supporting the Black Lives Matters movement or complete silence. That is until they saw it affecting the polling numbers. And then we hear Joe Biden come out and say, well, riots are not protests. No kidding. And that's the most he could say after 100 days of rioting. But what we haven't seen is that Democrats, the Democratic Party, and I want to make sure that's clear. We're talking about something different than rank and file Democrats for the most part. We have seen that they have not come out and done anything to help black people. I mean, think about it. Let's take a look at what happened over in, as one example, just one example of the 140 cities that have been affected by rioting and looting since this summer that have cost, and I'm going to get to it, billions of dollars. But just looking at Minnesota alone, where the George Floyd riots first happened and we saw that first impact. Now, what do you know about Minnesota? Minneapolis. Minneapolis is a city of roughly, it's estimated by the United States Census, of 429 some odd thousand people. Of that total, we can see that black Americans represent somewhere around 19%. I'm going to use 20% as a rounding number. So that means somewhere around 84, 86, somewhere in the 85,000 residents of Minneapolis are black. That's important to know. So in that city, in Minneapolis, we know that they have taken approximately, and this is reported by Minnesota's CBS Local News on June 3rd, the property damage from the George Floyd, it's not an unrest, it is riots and looting. The news media wants to frame this in the best way they possibly can. But when you have, and this is a fact, $55 million in the estimated destruction at that time, as of June, $55 million of damage with vandalism and or arson of 220 buildings at least, because as reported by CBS News, it's expected the number is going to go higher. And Minneapolis was looking for federal aid to fix these cities, to help rebuild these cities. And by the way, a lot of those businesses were black-owned businesses. A lot of those homes were black-owned homes. $55 million for Minneapolis alone, not counting Portland, not counting Seattle, not talking about Kenosha. There are many, many other cities that have had massive damage that has been affecting them. And we know that as of September 16th, reports have come out that the riots, and this one happens to be a report by the New York Post, that the range of the cost could be somewhere between $1 billion and $2 billion. $1 to $2 billion across 140 cities since May 6th. Actually, the number is even higher because according to the New York Post article, they're only looking at about 20 states. They're not looking at everything that's happened. We're talking about devastation on the level of natural disasters. Now, what have the high-profile Democrats done? We know that both the Biden campaign and the Kamala Harris campaign have gone out and they have helped the people arrested in the riots, the rioters and the looters. They've paid for their bail. We know that people who've been released have reoffended. And we've seen that even in, most recently in Rochester, we had an individual, Messiah Andrews, went out there and he got rearrested for rioting. So from previous charges he had earlier in the year, back in November of 2019. So here's the question, October of 2019. So what are they doing? Now, I looked very hard to try and find where is there anything. And the only thing I do have to admit, what I did see, and the most that I've been able to find, is that $1 million was raised to help businesses in North Minneapolis. About $1 million out of $55 million that was burnt down, destroyed, buildings that are vandalized or set arson to. You know what I also found out, which I thought was really interesting? Lebron James is paying for Florida felons so that they can vote in November. LeBron James. This came out in the Washington Examiner. He's out there and he wants to help pay for Florida felons to be able to vote. There's about 31,000 of them. In fact, he's joining with Michael Bloomberg. Now, Michael Bloomberg, who is a billionaire and a Democrat who very briefly, ran for the Democratic nomination for the president, is spending $20 million for those 31,000 felons so that they can vote, which sounds like he's paying to buy a vote, which is illegal. That's illegal. But let's think about this for a second. He's also spending, according to the Daily Mail out of England, $100 million. $100 million on the Biden campaign. Let's think about this for a second. We know that there is almost $2 billion, somewhere between $1 to $2 billion minimum, that has been caused, is the destruction that we have seen because of rioting and looting across the nation. Austin, in Atlanta, in Rochester, New York, in Portland, Seattle, all these places. And it's continuing. We may see riots. There's another event that's going on right now in Hartford, Connecticut, or just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, in Blue Hills, Connecticut, that may wind up being even more riots. So this is an ongoing problem. And just looking at Minneapolis alone, Democrats have displayed the ability to more than pay for this easily. Easily. Think about that. They raised $160 million in the space of a weekend. That's on top of the $100 million that's being spent by Bloomberg, actually $120 million. So that's $280 $260 million, $280 million raised by Democrats just to take care of felons and people who have been arrested for rioting and looting and causing $2 billion worth of damage. You notice what I mentioned before? They spent $1 million in rebuilding Minnesota. Where's the money for the black businesses that were burnt down? Where's the money for the black property owners that no longer have their properties, whether it's their home or rental properties? Where is the support for the economic devastation that has happened in all of the cities that I've mentioned so far, where business owners and black business owners and black homeowners no longer can go to work? They can no longer do business. Their business is destroyed. Their local community has been devastated. Let me ask you, where is that money? Because the Democratic Party has said they are the party of minorities. They speak for, according to the Democratic leaders, they speak for blacks. Mind you, that means Nancy Pelosi, who's white, Chuck Schumer, who's white, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden. These are the leaders. Yes, Kamala Harris is now in there. And yes, there is AOC, but they're not the leaders. But even given that, and again, that's not even counting the devastation of everyone who's been affected, but looking at just the effect on small businesses, small black-owned businesses, minority businesses, women's businesses, looking at the homeowners, black homeowners, single mothers, individuals who own property, who are trying to get to and from work every day, daycare centers that have been destroyed, schools that have been destroyed, banks that have been removed. Think about that. How much devastation has happened because of the rioting and looting? I'm not even talking about the protests. Americans have a right to protest. Protest all you want, but as long as it's peaceful. But just looking at the devastation, Democrats are more concerned about being able to get a new Senate. They're getting people elected into the Senate and controlling the Supreme Court, which so that they can technically protect Roe versus Wade, which is not in question, and to get more criminal justice reform and allow more of the criminals to be released into the public where they can reoffend. That's what they're worried about. They want to have criminals out who may, 10% of them seem to be able to reoffend. They want to make sure that they raise some money so that they can take over the Supreme Court. They want to make sure that felons are able to vote, but they have absolutely no concern about the damage to small businesses and communities, poor communities, communities that have need. They're not spending a dime on that. Where's the $280 million for those people? Lebron James is out there, Mr. Basketball himself. He's out there and he wants to make sure that felons can go out and vote. He wants to shut down the NBA season at one point until it was actually going to cost him money on his contract. But he's willing to protest that. Where's his donations to Minnesota? To Minneapolis, or to Portland, or to Seattle, Austin, Atlanta, New York City, Rochester? Where are those donations? Where is his support for that? I'm not even getting into the people who died, like David Dorn and Jessica Dottie Whitaker. We're not, or the 8-year-old child that was killed in Atlanta. I'm not even going to get into that. Where's their support for the people who are being devastated for the mere fact that they live in these cities? The $55 million of damage that was done to Minneapolis, That $55 million of damage, none of those people killed George Floyd. Not one. Those people, those communities, those black and minority individuals who are being devastated, they didn't do anything. They don't deserve to have their homes burned down, to have their restaurants broken up and disrupted like we've seen in Rochester and other places. Where's the money for them? If Democrats actually believe in protecting the minorities and protecting their businesses and helping them have better lives, where's that money? And you can't tell me that the news media wouldn't publicize that. It's an election year. They want to do anything that will help Democrats win. The major media leans left, if they're not extremely left. You mean to tell me that if LeBron James said, I'm putting $100 million to rebuild Minneapolis, if we heard that Michael Bloomberg said, I'm going to put $100 million to take care of Portland, Seattle, Austin, New York City, that the news media wouldn't cover that? Of course they would. So they're not doing it. And since they're not doing it, how can they truly say they're for minorities? I don't know. It's a question I have. And so again, I want to leave you with this very simple, very clear question that I have, which is, if they truly support minorities, why are they not helping to rebuild those minority homes and businesses that have been destroyed? How can we truly believe them? Maybe you know the answer. Maybe there's something that I could not find. I can tell you, I've been searching and I haven't found any evidence of what they've been doing. Maybe I missed it. But the question still remains, why aren't Democrats doing this? Why aren't they living up to their word? Or is it they're just using minorities to get power in an election? And if that's the case, is it really worth your vote? Well, that's the question I pose to you. I hope you're going to have a great day. I look forward to seeing your comments on the YouTube and Facebook. We look for all of your comments and we thank you. Please remember, on Sundays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream every week where we get to speak with you directly. But until then, I thank you and I hope you have a great day.